Let's get some further analysis with our political contributor, Chris Uhlmann. Chris, this is quite an interesting debate. We've seen the government try and wedge Peter Dutton this morning. Which way does the coalition go on the tax cut?
Well, it's got to have something, right? It would have been planning something for Thursday night, which would be the big centrepiece of his budget and reply speech. He knew he was coming into an election, so he has to do something that captures the imagination of people. I can tell you that having been in another place, the ABC, when that thing went to air, that was the worst rating show of any show on the ABC ever. Budget and reply speech. Nobody watches it. So one thing gets out of there, it's got to be something that captures the imagination of the Australian people. Now, is that budget cuts? You know, there are things that, is that tax cuts? It could be some other big, but it's got to be a cost of living play. It's got to be something where people can go, aha, I can see how that would make my life easier. So by rejecting the tax cuts, perhaps he needs that money in order to fund something else. It may not necessarily be tax cuts, but as with all these things, Kieran, we will know soon enough on Thursday night.
But I guess that it also is going to need something brave because to defeat a first-term government of whatever stripe is very unusual. It hasn't happened for 100 years. You need to be brave, don't you?
Yeah, and you need to gather up as many people as you can. And the big story of politics now is that both major parties are dealing with very low primary votes. I don't think the crossbench changes much. We've got, 18, 19 people on the crossbench in the lower house at the moment. So both major parties are pushing for what's left on either side of that. So the room in which they can move now is really quite narrow. So again, yes, you have to capture people's imagination and you do have to be bold. He's coming from so far behind. And he said that he wants to do this in one term. I don't think that he can get there on the numbers, like 57, 58 on his side. You've got to get to 76. The government starts on 78. Anthony Albanese is looking a lot more confident than he was. So obviously internally he's hearing that things are going well for the government. Clearly the opposition has hit the wobbles. Peter Dutton now has one chance to restabilise, he's also got the most important audiences behind him.
Yeah.
So he's got to get the party, which is beginning to wobble a bit, back on track and believing that they've got a chance in this. So tomorrow night's a big deal, and the first audience is to the people behind him, the government in front of him, and then to the people of Australia.
When you rightly point out that traditionally the budget reply hasn't been the great, marketing platform.
It is. No one watches.
No one watches. But I think in this year, ahead of an election being called possibly Friday, the day after, this takes on a lot more importance for so many different reasons, as you say, for his own side, but also himself to say, I can make this case and reassure the Australian people I'm up to it.
I think it's an all or nothing play for Peter Dutton. He's got to roll the dice. Someone was saying to me this morning that he might even be concerned about what's happening in his own seat, but in the end that doesn't really matter. I mean, he might as well roll the dice, go for broke, and if he loses his seat in an election campaign, then he's a young man, he can go off and do other things because his leadership would be up for grabs after he loses an election anyway. So I think that this is a moment to do something bold. I fear they haven't done the work. And I think that showed in Angus Taylor on the weekend. I think that there hasn't been enough work done by the coalition to position themselves to be able to take it in one term, and it was always going to be a very big ask, and for that they can thank Scott Morrison, who left them in a terrible position at the end of the last term.
Yeah, and the backdrop for all of this, just finally, they talk about global uncertainty, but in large part we're talking about Donald Trump, aren't we?
We are, but how do you feel at the moment? So you can feel this yourself, and I'm sure the rest of the electorate's feeling it. I always think now that it's very hard to communicate to the Australian people because they're across so many platforms. They are distracted by things. They are not focusing on what's going on here mostly. They'll get bits and pieces of it. But Donald Trump has unsettled the world. And then you've got what's going on in Ukraine and what's going on in the Middle East at the moment. We've seen that leaking into our own society. So people are feeling uncomfortable. And I really don't think that it's a good look for the coalition to be saying we'll be able to deal better with Donald Trump than the government, because in Australia, Donald Trump is not a great selling point. He is making people very, very nervous. So you'd want to be careful about your messaging. And I'm sure the government will be trying to put Peter Dutton as close to Donald Trump as they possibly can in the election campaign.
Chris Uhlmann, great to see you, get your insights as always. Thank you.
Thanks, mate.